Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to this week's Q&A. My voice is still messed up from Sunday, and I caught a cold yesterday. I guess 8 million people in the city. I'm just surrounded by germs all the time, so very sorry if I'm all nasally and bad sounding. No mic in the world will fix a crappy voice, so sorry, but let's jump right into the questions. First up, QCRetro wanted to chime in about the NES RGB dejitter stuff. He said that NES RGB version 1 boards can be updated to handle the dejitter, but the only downside is that to make it fit on the Rev 1 chip, Tim had to sacrifice the palette swap feature. So you can only have one palette if you want dejitter on the first revision board. Another classic case of read the fucking manual. Well, that's a little rude, man. Sometimes you can't really find all the information you need. Sometimes you Google something and it's just not there. I'm totally guilty of that, obviously, even with this question. But that's a pretty interesting thing. I honestly never knew that. And when Tim announced the new ones, I think most people were so concentrated on the new board that we totally overlooked that original feature. That's pretty cool, though. I mean, I think most people just leave it on whatever the default palette is anyway. You know, they'll flash it once with their preferred, but then whatever's number one, your average NES RGB user just leaves one. So that's pretty cool. Maybe I could try that out on mine just for testing, but I honestly never knew that. I think a bunch of people were buying the separate dejitter boards to install on that without ever knowing. So I'm really wondering if there's any ifs, ands, or buts about that, if there's any revisions or anything that can't have that feature or can, or if it really is all of the 1.0 boards or original version 1 boards. So yeah, thanks QCRetro for reminding me of that. I totally didn't even realize that was a thing. And I guess if you're looking into getting a dejitter board on your NES RGB, do a little bit more research on whatever version you have and see if you could handle just having one palette but adding the dejitter feature. PetersShowStrand had a question. I wonder if I got that name right. I always try. Sorry. He's interested in capturing high-quality audio and video from various consoles and making it available to anyone who might be interested in seeing how some older games look and play, like on original hardware. Or in some cases, something that's fairly close to original hardware, such as the Mega SG and Super NT. He's pretty new to video capture, but has been reading through the video capture page on the website to try and get a better grasp of it. However, he was hoping that perhaps I'd be able to give some advice for his specific setup. Some of the consoles he'd like to capture include the Mega SG and Super NT, as well as the Dreamcast with DC HDMI. Since he normally gets a digital signal out of these, it seems to him that it should be fairly easy to get high-quality captures from all of them. Yes, so I'll get back to the rest of your question, but if it's got an HDMI out, it's going to be infinitely easier. Just make sure to customize the settings in the Mega SG and Super NT. You want to make sure that it's a correct 4:3 aspect ratio. And, you know, there's still some debate about Sega Genesis 320, but if your goal is to present it the way it was presented on CRTs, 4:3 aspect ratio on both, and make sure you have all the other optimal settings in there. But yes, everything should be perfect. Same thing with Dreamcast. I guess I would just do the 480p output, just so it's the same size and shape, I guess. But yeah, that should be infinitely easier than going analog from those. But to continue, he also has a Saturn as well as a Wii, and if possible, he'd like to capture these as well. Currently, he's using the OSSC for playing the Saturn and the Wii on an LG OLED C8, using good quality cables for them. An RGB SCART Pack-a-Punch Pro cable for the Saturn, and an HD Retrovision Wii cable for the Wii. Don't know if it makes any difference, but only interested in capturing, not intended to do any kind of streaming, so that's not a factor. So for the rest of those, as long as you have a capture card that's compatible with the signal, the best thing to do would be to enter the optimal timings in the OSSC and then just capture straight HDMI. I've had a nightmarish time capturing Wii and GameCube, and I don't know what my problem is. And that's actually my problem is I don't know what the problem is. And one of these days I was going to sit down with Extrems and Dark Aries and kind of have them walk me through stupid proofing everything that I'm doing, because I'm sure it's just one thing that I'm not seeing that's probably super obvious, but it's one of those things. And the Saturn is fairly easy to do direct RGB, but then you need to run into things like you need to make sure there's a low pass filter, you need to make sure you're running the right sync levels to go direct into a data path. So if you already have an OSSC, I would say that that's equal in every way to presenting this info. The only times I would ever think there would be a difference between the OSSC and direct RGB is if there was a setting that you didn't understand. And when I say you, I mean that any of us don't understand. Because there were a few times where I thought I had everything dialed in perfect with the OSSC, and I got some good captures, but I went direct RGB through the data path, and I got better captures. So I was trying to figure out what I did wrong, and then eventually I realized I just didn't understand one setting. I had it slightly off. So luckily, though, there should be the optimal timings available. You would just need to know what resolution the Saturn games are in, and make sure the optimal timing is set for that resolution. But overall, you're very lucky that you have mostly HDMI stuff. The only other thing I would worry about is a lot of capture cards, once you start to hit 1080p, they start to compress the colors. I'm going to oversimplify a little bit. So even on that Epiphan USB to DVI to USB, sorry, I reversed that. Even on that really awesome capture card I have, up to 720p, you get the full color spectrum, 60 frames per second, everything works fine. But once you hit 1080p, the colors get a little compressed, which is usually not a big deal. But if you're looking for an accurate representation, I would try to record in like 480p, to be honest with you, or 720p, depending on your target, and then scale that afterwards. And that's also in the video capture section of if you have a 480p signal, how do you make that into 1080p or 4K and all that. So the only debate would be what's your final resolution going to be. So depending on what it is, if you're doing like 10x 4K, then 480p would probably be the better resolution. But if you're doing like, just 720p, leave it in that resolution, stuff like that. So I would kind of just go through and double check all of the post-processing stuff. But as far as capture goes, you're lucky that you got a great setup already. And just make sure you have a capture card that doesn't mess with the signal. So DataPath, Epiphan, Magewell, and some others, but those are the ones that I usually stick with to know that at those resolutions, even over USB, I could get up to 720p and know that it's full color spectrum. And the DataPath's internal card, but that one I've definitely done 1080p 60 and been able to do it without compressed colors. So great question, and please post a link if you start posting these videos somewhere, because I would certainly like to take a look. Konrad Klaus had 2 questions. First, is there a way to search posts on the site? Yes. It's getting a little bit cut off in this view, but if you click the 3 dots in the upper left-hand corner, you have the full menu with all of the, the options, and then the search bar is right there, and it works pretty well. I don't usually have issues with it. It also does searches in order, in chronological order. So like for GBA, like you were asking about, it just started with the newest post and went down. And speaking of your next question, you were asking about the new GBA replacement screen, and you don't want to cannibalize an AGS 101. So yeah, this is exactly what you were talking about. This is the IPS backlit screen that's actually a little bit bigger than the original GBA screen. And you said, you don't really have any nostalgia for the look of the original screen. So this IPS is going to be your best choice. They're inexpensive, they're easy to install, and they look really good. The only complaint I've ever heard of people saying is it kind of looks like emulation because it's so good. So I mean, if you don't care about that, absolutely grab it. That's definitely the answer to your question. And on an aside, you also mentioned, are the DS Lite screen as small as the original DS? I'm drawing a blank at the moment, but I thought they were identical in size. I could be wrong about that one, but I would, if you're really just looking to play GBA games, I would try to get that IPS screen, or like you said, just wait for the Analog Pocket, but no official release date on that. So, it's always that same debate. Do you wait for the next product, or do you just buy what's out there now? And I'm pretty sure you could just get those IPS screens out there now. Cam asked, what's currently the best way to play Dreamcast on a BVM that only supports 240p? Is hunting down an Extron Amosha still the best choice? So I think you have two questions there. First and foremost, any BVM that only supports 240p, it's actually only supporting 15 kilohertz, which is 240p and 480i. And if in that case, any RGB SCART cable for the Dreamcast will be fine. I obviously always recommend ones from Retro Gaming Cables and Retro Access, and not some of the cheap $2 ones you see on eBay. But if that's it, then that's all you have to worry about. Of course, 480i games will be interlaced, but on a BVM, on any CRT, actually, it's not as noticeable as on a flat screen. You don't get that headache-inducing flicker. It's not as sharp as progressive, but it's still totally fine. And depending on the game, you might not even notice. I know that sounds weird, but with some of the 3D games, it's harder to tell, I guess. But if you want to talk about an Extron Mosha, the other thing that you could do is downscale 480p to 240p, and you lose some resolution, but you get that nice progressive look. And you would need a downscaler like an Extron Mosha or a Choreo TV1 box that you'd have to then program. But those add about a frame of lag, give or take a little bit. So overall, in my personal opinion, if I were you, I would just get any decent quality SCART cable and just play it in 240p and 480i, and it should be a perfectly good experience. The only time I would say it wouldn't be is if you're gaming on a flat screen with 480i. So yeah, if I were you, I would just grab a SCART cable and not worry about it at all. If you really insisted on doing the 480p to 240p, try to look for one of those Choreo TV1 boxes and then just search on the site. Somebody had just posted, I think this year, had posted a guide on how to configure those and get them working. But for me personally, just straight SCART and 480i for a CRT. Kirk had a couple of questions, and the answer might start to get a little complicated, so I'll try to break it up and make it as simple as possible. Kirk just got a CRT to play the consoles on and needs some new cables to use for it. They've got an S-Video cable for Super Famicom, but are having trouble with Mega Drive. They already have a SCART cable that they use for the OSSC, but the CRT doesn't have this input. They've seen a cheap SCART to component device on eBay and was wondering if I have any experience with these. He's seen HD Retrovision's component cables for the Mega Drive, but the price is keeping him off from purchasing one at this time. And they're probably not in stock today. They're coming back in, I think. So that's all interesting questions. So because you said you've seen a cheap SCART to component device on eBay, I'm going to assume that your CRT has component, SCART, and composite. If not, please let me know and I'll correct my answer for next week. But let's just assume that's the case. In this scenario, what I would normally do if you only have a few consoles, like when I started out, it would be HD Retrovision on Genesis, because Genesis doesn't have S-Video output, Super Nintendo or Super Famicom via S-Video, and regular NES or Master System via composite. But I, in that scenario, would have just played Master System through Genesis. And that way you have all of the inputs of your CRT filled, you don't have to mod any of your consoles, and it's pretty easy. Now, as the only time that I would change that is if you already have a whole bunch of SCART cables into a switch going into your OSSC, then I would absolutely buy the RetroTink SCART to component adapter and use that. I believe there's another one made by LinuxBot, and I have not had a chance to test it yet, still, sorry. But I've tested other products from them, and they work great. So, but I have personally tested the RetroTink, so I can vouch for that one. No disrespect to all the rest. But the cheap ones that you find are garbage. Don't waste your money. And I think the funny part is the next cheapest from the RetroTink is only like $20 cheaper, and it's garbage. It's the one with you got to calibrate it on a scope in order to get it to work right or even look right. That was one of the first things I tested when I started testing SCART 10 years ago now. So good question, but definitely stay away from the junk. So I guess at that point, it's really just deciding what you want. So the HD Retrovisions are expensive. They're $65. However, those are cables that you could use on the OSSC, your consumer TV, your RGB monitor. You know, they're really, you get what you pay for with those. And if the scenario is right for you, I highly recommend them. But once again, if you already have a full RGB SCART setup, I would recommend the RetroTink over the HD Retrovision just because, it's kind of overkill. You don't have to unplug and replug something. So I guess I think I was able to answer your question okay. My only questions for you then would be, how many consoles are you looking to hook up? Do you already have RGB SCART cables for them for your OSSC? And do you have something like a G-SCART switch with 2 outputs? Because that would really determine it. If you already do, grab the RetroTink converter. If you don't, and you really only have those 3 consoles, then yeah, definitely the HD Retrovision Genesis cable is worth it. And then just the other 2 as stated. Super Famicom is S-Video, NES is composite. And to be honest, depending on where you live and the quality of your TV, which if it's got component inputs, it's going to be a newer CRT, NES over RF might not look bad. And that was something that really shocked me, because here in Manhattan, where I have a million wireless networks around me, RF is almost, you can't even see what's on the screen practically. But every time I brought that same TV and that same console and the same cables to these trade shows, most people couldn't tell the difference between RF and composite because we weren't around a bunch of interference. We were just in a room somewhere. So that might get you a 4th input if you have like N64 over composite's probably a good choice, because composite isn't very bad on S-Video compared to others, and it'll smooth out some of those 3D graphics. So let me know if I can clarify anything more for you, but hopefully I at least aimed you in the direction you were trying to go into. And lastly, a question from Bad Reality. He wants to know why I haven't interviewed RetroTech, and if there's any issues or if there's a reason why I haven't interviewed him. And while it's a complicated answer, I would like to skip to the end for a moment and say that I recently met RetroTech in person. He seems awesome, definitely knows what he's doing. I have no complaints or nothing negative to say at all. But the answer to this question's unfortunately a little bit more complicated than a yes or no answer. So, allow me a moment to ramble here. First and foremost, ask any question you want. I would appreciate if you asked it nicely, as you did. But even if you didn't, I still would have answered the question. So don't ever feel weird about asking stuff that could be controversial or anything like that. I'm completely transparent. And if there's something I can't talk about, like NDA reasons, I'll just tell you. So don't worry about that at all. Next, the answer is almost always, the answer to the question, why haven't you, is almost always time. So I plan every single day of my week, 7 days, and I'm not complaining, by the way. I love what I do. I wouldn't want to do anything else right now, but I do plan all 7 days. So even like when I try to have my football Sundays, I get up early and I still get like 5 or 6 hours worth of work in before I could then just drink beer and watch football. But since every day is scheduled, very often things, almost always actually, things come in and sweep the rug out from under me. Sometimes it's great things like a new product I wasn't expecting that I get to do a review on. Other times it's just, a new project I'm doing behind the scenes. That's probably the most common thing that pulls the rug out from under me. Is I'd planned 5 or 6 hours to shoot video, and I ended up spending that time testing and R&D stuff. And also days like today where I woke up with a very hardcore plan about how I'm going to record all this video, and now I'm sick, so I'm just going to drink a whole bunch of vitamins and that sounded weird. Now I'm just going to drink. No, not alcohol. A whole bunch of vitamins and stuff, and write some scripts and take it easy. But so time is absolutely the number one factor with these interviews, and I have to work around my schedule and the other people's. And I'm in a tiny ass apartment, so if somebody can't do an interview till 9 p.m. Pacific time, that means I got to be talking loudly at midnight. Like, I don't want to piss off my neighbors, so that's a problem. Also, I don't like doing Skype interviews. Sometimes you have to, because it's, in fact, in the next few weeks, I do have interviews scheduled from people around the world where there's just no other option. But I mean, it just, the delay drives me crazy, and I'm sick of hearing people in the comments saying, oh, why is Bob always talking over his guests? I don't mean to. Even last week, I was talking to Jimmy Hoppa, just a conversation, not an interview, and we kept talking over each other because there was like a 2-second delay at some points. So, that's another reason that the interviews have been fewer and far between lately, because it feels so much different to be doing it in person. And the last thing is scheduling promotion around the interviews. And that's something that I've failed miserably on in the past. So things like my friend Beast, right? He doesn't sell anything. He doesn't have anything coming out. He's just a streamer and somebody that contributes a lot to R&D and beta testing in the retro gaming world. So there kind of wasn't a bad time to put out that interview. It's just one of these here, enjoy a fun conversation between friends and here's my channel type of thing. So that worked out well. But there have been a few interviews in the past that got like no views and decent audio listens, but that deserved an extra zero at the end of how many views they got. And I felt awful because they deserved a lot more than that. So I want to try to plan and promote around things like that. And sometimes it's selfish. Like the interview I did with Spider Waffle, I wanted to do that interview exactly when I did it because that aired the day after I posted the video of look out for eBay scalpers for monitors, because I really needed that contrast of like, here's what to look out for and here's an example that there are people that are trying, whether they pull it off or not, at least they're not out to get you type of thing. So to finally, 4 minutes later, answer your question, the reason I haven't specifically interviewed RetroTech is just because I haven't had a time to organize it to the way he would deserve to have the interview done. I have something coming up with him in a few months, I think. I think that's still on. So I was planning on trying to work around that and maybe do an interview then and talk about stuff. But it's really just a combination of, if possible, I'd like to do it in person and circle it around something that would help promote the things that these people are doing. Because don't forget, as much as I really love having these conversations, my goal is also to expose these awesome people to the rest of the gaming world. And every time I have a low hit video for somebody or something that really deserves a lot of exposure, I've now failed. So I'm really trying hard to work on that. And I think you said something like you haven't heard me mention RetroTech before. I'm pretty positive I have. It just, maybe it wasn't as out there and in your face as some other stuff. But no beef whatsoever. Nothing but respect. Definitely going to see some stuff with him in the future. And hopefully my answer to this would explain why I might not have interviewed other people. But as always, if anybody has suggestions, feel free to throw them out there. There was a few times that people said, hey, how come you haven't interviewed so-and-so? And I went, oh crap, I haven't. So sometimes I just need a reminder. But hopefully that was a good, clear answer as to how the craziness of how I do things works and why the interviews haven't been as plentiful as they used to be. And if you disagree, definitely let me know. I'm always all ears for what feedback people have. I might not agree with your feedback, but I always appreciate it and listen to it. So good questions. Well, that's it for this week. If you're new to the Q&As, ask any question you'd like wherever it is that you support in the newest Q&A post. The way these things work, it's kind of impossible to sift back through older posts, so just find the latest Q&A and post right there, and I'll get to it next week. If for whatever reason I don't, it's always a mistake. It's never intentional, so please just re-ask the question or something like that, and I'll get right to it. As always, though, thank you so much to everybody who supports. None of these videos or the behind-the-scenes work or all the craziness could happen without you, so thank you so much, and I'll see you next week.